Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking out at the vast display of ships spread before him. 1,200 vessels of the Zephyrian hegemony floated in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the light of distant stars. Each ship was massive, built for war and conquest. The smallest destroyer was 3 times larger than anything the humans possessed, according to their intelligence reports. The commander's scaled hands gripped the railing as he watched his fleet, prepare for what would surely be the easiest conquest in hegemony history. The humans were barely a spacefaring species, having only recently developed faster-than-light travel. Their ships were tiny, primitive things that barely qualified as warships. The intelligence officers had laughed when they presented their findings about human military capabilities. "Commander," his tactical officer called out, "all ships report ready for the jump to the Sol system. The humans won't know what hit them." Vextar nodded, his confidence absolute. The hegemony had conquered 47 species over the past 2 centuries. None had lasted more than a few days against their overwhelming firepower. The humans would be no different. Their small fleet of less than 50 ships would surrender within hours of seeing the hegemony armada. Meanwhile, in the Sol system, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the UNS Defiance, staring at the tactical display with growing concern. The long-range sensors had detected something massive approaching from beyond the outer planets. Whatever it was big enough to show up on their instruments from billions of miles away. "Captain," his sensor operator called out. "I'm reading. Multiple contacts, hundreds of them, sir. Maybe more than 1,000. Morrison felt his stomach drop. Earth's entire defense fleet consisted of 47 ships, and most of those were converted cargo vessels with hastily mounted weapons. They had been built to defend against pirates and small raiders, not an invasion force of this size. "Get me Admiral Carter on the emergency channel," Morrison ordered. Priority 1. The main screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Lisa Carter in her command center on Earth. Her face was grim as she received the same sensor data from multiple sources across the system. "Jake," she said without preamble, "how bad is it out there?" "Worse than we thought possible, Admiral. Our computers can't even count them all accurately. Best estimate is over 1,000 ships, possibly 1,200. They're massive, Lisa. Each one is bigger than our heavy cruisers." Carter closed her eyes for a moment, processing the impossible situation. Earth had always known this day might come. Humanity's expansion into space had been rapid, perhaps too rapid. They had established colonies on 6 worlds and built trade routes with 3 alien species. But they had also made enemies. "All ship commanders, emergency meeting in 1 hour," Carter announced across all channels. "We have a situation." Back aboard his flagship, Vextar reviewed the intelligence files on human military technology. Their weapons were pathetic compared to hegemony plasma cannons. Their shields were weak energy barriers that any serious weapon could punch through. Their armor was simple metal plating that would melt under concentrated fire. The humans had only one advantage. They were defending their home system. History showed that cornered animals sometimes fought harder than expected, but it never mattered against overwhelming force. The hegemony had learned this lesson many times over their centuries of conquest. Dr. Elena Rodriguez worked frantically in the engineering section of the UNS Stalwart, making final adjustments to systems that had never been tested in actual combat. The theoretical calculations looked promising, but theory and reality were often different things when plasma bolts started flying. "How much time do we have?" she asked her assistant, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Maybe 6 hours before they reach weapons range," came the reply. "The Admiral wants all experimental systems online and ready." Rodriguez nodded, turning back to her work. Humanity's survival might depend on weapons and defenses that existed only on paper until today. The responsibility was crushing, but she pushed the fear aside and focused on the equations that might save her species. Captain Ben Parker studied his orders aboard the UNS Stalwart, preparing his crew for what would likely be their final battle. His ship was one of the newer vessels, equipped with some of the experimental technology that Rodriguez and her team had developed. If it worked, they might have a chance. If it didn't, Earth would fall within days. "All hands, battle stations," Parker announced over the ship's communication system. "This is not a drill. Prepare for incoming hostile contact." The alien fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system with a flash of distorted light that was visible from Earth itself. Vextar smiled as his sensors immediately detected the pathetic human fleet moving to intercept them. 47 ships against 1,200. It would be over quickly. Open communications, Vextar ordered. Let's see if these humans are smart enough to surrender before we have to destroy them. The message reached the human fleet within minutes, translated by their computers into understandable language. The demands were simple. Immediate surrender of all human worlds and colonies, followed by integration into the hegemony as a servant species. Refusal would result in the complete destruction of human civilization. Admiral Carter read the message aloud to her assembled ship commanders, their faces appearing on screens throughout her command center. The silence that followed was deafening. Well, Captain Morrison finally said, I guess that settles the question of their intentions. Any ship that wants to withdraw to defend the colonies has my permission, Carter announced. This is going to be a one-way trip for most of us. Not a single. Captain took the offer. Every ship in the fleet moved into battle formation, their crews preparing for a fight they couldn't possibly win through conventional means. Rodriguez finished her work on the experimental systems just as the alien fleet began moving toward them. Her hands shook as she activated devices that had never been used outside of laboratory conditions. The power readings looked stable, but there was no way to know if they would work when they were needed most. Vextar watched the human fleet form, up for battle, and laughed. They were actually going to fight. Their tiny ships looked like toys compared to his massive dreadnoughts. Each of his heavy cruisers carried more firepower than the entire human fleet combined. Signal the fleet, he ordered. We'll destroy a few of their ships to demonstrate our superiority, then accept their surrender. Try not to damage them too badly. We'll need some intact vessels to study their primitive technology. The distance between the two fleets closed, steadily. On both sides, weapon systems came online and targeting computers calculated firing solutions. The humans knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, but they also knew they were fighting for their survival as a species. Captain Parker watched his tactical display as the alien ships grew larger and more threatening. His crew worked with quiet efficiency, preparing weapons and defenses that might not be enough to save them. But they would make the aliens pay for every human life, no matter the cost. The battle that would determine humanity's fate was about to begin, and neither side fully understood what they were about to face. The aliens expected easy victory against primitive opponents, while the humans prepared to unleash technology and tactics that had never been tested in real combat. In the cold vacuum of space, two very different philosophies of warfare were about to collide, and the results would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Commander Vextar stood before the massive tactical display showing both fleets as they moved closer together. The human ships looked like insects compared to his mighty warships. His smallest frigate was still twice the size of their largest cruiser. The sight filled him with satisfaction and amusement. Look at them, he said to his officers gathered around the display. They actually think they can fight us. 47 tiny ships against our grand fleet, it's almost sad. His tactical officer, a younger Zephyrian named Kethra, studied the human formation with interest. Their ships are arranged in an unusual pattern, Commander. It's not like any formation we've seen before. Vextar waved a scaled hand dismissively. Primitive tactics from a primitive species. They probably don't even know proper military formations. We'll crush them and move on to occupying their worlds. On the human side, Captain Morrison watched the alien fleet approach with growing dread. Each enemy ship was enormous, bristling, with weapons that could probably destroy his entire vessel with a single shot. The aliens had arranged themselves in a classic hammer formation, designed to smash through any opposition with overwhelming force. Communications? Any response to our attempts at contact? Morrison asked. Lieutenant Amy Collins shook her head at her station. Nothing except their surrender demands, sir. They're not interested in talking. Morrison nodded grimly. He had hoped for some kind of diplomatic solution, but it was clear the aliens had come here for conquest, not conversation. The human fleet would have to fight with everything they had. Aboard the Zephyrian flagship, Science Officer Kethra finished analyzing the human ships with their advanced sensors. The results were exactly what she had expected. The human vessels were primitive in almost every way. "Commander," she reported, "their ships use simple fusion drives, very slow compared to our quantum engines. Their weapons appear to be basic kinetic projectiles and crude energy beams, nothing that could penetrate our quantum shields." Vextar smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "And their defenses? Primitive armor plating and weak energy barriers. Our plasma cannons will cut through them like paper. I estimate we could destroy their entire fleet in less than 10 minutes if we wished." The commander was pleased with this assessment. "Excellent. We'll make this quick and efficient. Signal the fleet to prepare for combat. We'll destroy 5 or 6 of their ships to show them we mean business, then they'll surrender." On Earth, Admiral Carter sat in her command bunker, watching the same tactical display that showed the approaching alien fleet. Every human ship was represented by a small blue dot, while the alien vessels appeared as red markers. The difference in numbers was staggering and terrifying. "Status report on the experimental systems," she requested. Dr. Rodriguez appeared on her screen from the UNS Stalwart. "All systems are online and ready, Admiral, but I have to warn you, we've never tested any of this in actual combat conditions. The power requirements alone could overload our reactors." "Will it work?" Carter asked directly. Rodriguez hesitated. "In theory, yes. But theory and practice can be very different things. If the calculations are wrong, we could lose ships to our own weapons." Carter nodded, understanding. "Noted. Proceed with the plan. We don't have any other options." Captain Ben Parker walked through the corridors of his ship, checking on his crew as they prepared for battle. The faces he saw were tense, but determined. Everyone knew they were probably going to die, but they were ready to fight anyway. "Engineering status report," Parker called over the intercom. "All experimental systems are online, Captain," came the reply. "Dr. Rodriguez says we're as ready as we'll ever be." Parker returned to his bridge and settled into his command chair. Through the main view screen, he could see the alien fleet in the distance, a cluster of massive shapes moving steadily toward them. Vextar decided it was time to demonstrate hegemony power. "Target their lead ship," he ordered. "Fire a warning shot across their bow. Let them see what our weapons can do." A brilliant beam of plasma energy lanced out from the Zephyrian flagship, passing just ahead of the UNS Defiance. The beam was so powerful it lit up the space around both fleets, and its heat could be felt even through the ship's hull. Morrison watched the display of alien firepower with growing concern. If that beam had hit his ship directly, it would have cut the Defiance in half. The aliens were demonstrating that they could destroy the human fleet whenever they chose. "Sir," Collins called out, "we're receiving another message from the aliens." "Put it through," Morrison replied. The alien commander's voice came through the speakers, translated by their computers. "Humans, you have seen our power. Surrender. Now, and your deaths will be quick. Continue to resist and we will destroy your ships one by one, slowly and painfully." Morrison looked around his bridge at his crew. They were scared, but they were also angry. The aliens had come to their home system to conquer and enslave them. There would be no surrender. "Send them our response," Morrison ordered. "Tell them humans don't surrender." Collins transmitted the message, and the alien fleet responded almost immediately. Dozens of plasma beams lanced out toward the human ships, lighting up the darkness of space with deadly energy. "All ships evasive maneuvers," Admiral Carter ordered from her command center. "Begin combat operations, show them what humans can do." The human fleet scattered as the alien weapons fire reached them. The ships moved with surprising speed and agility, dodging most of the incoming plasma beams. Those that were hit shrugged off the damage better than the aliens had expected. Vexitar frowned as he watched the results of the first exchange. Several of his shots had hit human ships directly, but they were still operational. Their defenses were stronger than his science officer had predicted. "How are they still functioning?" he demanded. Kethra worked frantically at her console, recalculating her analysis. "I'm not sure, Commander. Their armor appears to be more advanced than we thought. It's some kind of layered system that distributes the energy of our weapons. Before Vextar could respond, the human fleet opened fire, but instead of the primitive weapons they had expected, the aliens found themselves facing something entirely different. Streams of projectiles moving at incredible speed tore through space toward the Zephyrian fleet. These weren't simple bullets or missiles. They were dense metal slugs accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, carrying kinetic energy that could punch through almost any defense. "Shields up," Vexitar ordered, but it was too late for some of his ships. The kinetic projectiles slammed into 3 Zephyrian cruisers with devastating effect. The quantum shields that were supposed to protect them proved useless against solid matter moving at such incredible speeds. The projectiles tore through the alien hulls like they were made of paper. "Impossible," Kethra whispered as she watched the tactical display. "Those weapons shouldn't exist. How did they accelerate solid matter to those velocities?" Vexitar stared, in shock as one of his heavy cruisers exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The humans had just destroyed a ship that was 5 times larger than their biggest vessel. His confidence began to crack for the first time. "Return fire," he ordered. "All ships concentrate fire on their lead vessels. Destroy them now." But as the Zephyrian fleet tried to respond, they discovered that the humans had more surprises waiting for them. Beams of focused particles lanced out from the human ships, cutting through alien shields and armor with frightening efficiency. The battle was not going as Vextar had planned. The humans were supposed to be primitive and helpless. Instead, they were fighting back with weapons that his scientists had never imagined possible. "Commander," his tactical officer called out, "we're receiving damage reports from across the fleet. The humans are using technology we don't understand." Vexitar watched as another of his ships took critical damage from a human particle beam. The aliens had expected an easy victory, but they were discovering that humans were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The space around both fleets erupted in deadly light as the battle began in earnest. Plasma beams from the alien ships painted bright lines across the darkness, while human kinetic rounds and particle beams answered back with equal fury. What had started as a demonstration of power had quickly become a real fight. Captain Ben Parker felt his ship shake as another plasma bolt struck the UNS Stalwart. The impact sent crew members stumbling, but the ship's systems remained stable. The layered armor that Dr. Rodriguez had designed was holding up better than anyone had dared hope. "Damage report," Parker called out over the noise of battle. "Hull, breach on Deck 7, but the emergency systems have sealed it," his damage control officer reported. "Armor is holding. We can take more hits like that." Parker nodded and turned his attention back to the tactical display. The alien ships were huge and powerful, but they were also slow to maneuver. His smaller, faster ship could dart between their massive hulls, avoiding their heavier weapons while striking at vulnerable points. "Helm, take us in close to that heavy cruiser," Parker ordered. "Weapons, prepare the gravity torpedoes." Aboard the Zephyrian flagship, Commander Vexitar watched in growing alarm as more of his ships took damage from the unexpected human weapons. The kinetic projectiles were tearing through his ship's hulls like they were made of cloth, while the particle beams seemed to cut through quantum shields as if they didn't exist. "How is this possible?" he demanded from his science officer. "Our intelligence said they were primitive." Kethra worked frantically at her console, trying to understand what she was seeing. "Commander, I'm analyzing the human weapons. These kinetic projectiles are accelerated using some kind of magnetic field system. The velocities they're achieving should be impossible with their technology level." Another Zephyrian ship exploded on the tactical display, its reactor going critical after a direct hit from a human particle beam. Vextar realized with growing horror that he was losing ships to an enemy he had expected to crush easily. Captain Morrison watched from the bridge of the UNS Defiance as his fleet engaged the alien armada. The humans were badly outnumbered, but they were making every shot count. His weapons officer had just scored a direct hit on an alien destroyer, and the enemy ship was drifting helplessly with its engines destroyed. "Captain," Lieutenant Collins called out, "I'm intercepting alien communications. They're in some kind of panic. Their commanders are demanding to know why their weapons aren't working as expected." Morrison allowed himself a small smile. "Good. Keep monitoring their channels. Any intelligence we can gather might help us. Dr. Rodriguez worked at her engineering station aboard the Stalwart, monitoring the performance of her experimental weapon systems. The gravity torpedoes were performing even better than her calculations had predicted. Each one created a small distortion in space-time that literally tore enemy ships apart from the inside. "Captain Parker," she called over the intercom. "The gravity torpedoes are working perfectly, but we only have 6 left. We need to make them count." Parker acknowledged her report as he watched an alien heavy cruiser turn toward his ship. The enemy vessel was massive, easily 10 times the size of the Stalwart, and its weapons were charging for what would surely be a devastating attack. "Fire gravity torpedo," Parker ordered. "Target their engine section." The torpedo streaked through space, invisible to most sensors but clearly visible on the Stalwart's specialized tracking systems. When it reached the alien ship, it detonated in a burst of twisted space-time that crushed the enemy vessel's engine compartment like an empty can. The massive alien ship began to drift, its engines completely destroyed. Emergency lights flickered along its hull as the crew struggled to maintain life support systems. Vextar stared at his tactical display in disbelief. Another of his ships had just been crippled by a weapon he didn't understand. The human ship that had fired it was tiny compared to his heavy cruiser, yet it had delivered a killing blow with apparent ease. "All ships concentrate fire on the human vessels," he ordered desperately. "Destroy them before they can use more of these weapons." The Zephyrian fleet began to focus their attacks on individual human ships, trying to overwhelm their defenses with massed plasma fire. Several human vessels took heavy damage, but their advanced armor and defensive systems kept them in the fight longer than should have been possible. Admiral Carter watched the battle from her command center, coordinating the movements of her small fleet with the skill of a master chess player. Every human ship was precious, and she couldn't afford to lose any of them to careless tactics. "All ships execute Formation Delta," she ordered. "Use the asteroid field to break up their formations." The human fleet began to move toward a nearby asteroid field, using the rocky debris as cover while they continued to strike at the alien ships. The maneuver forced the Zephyrians to split their forces, making them vulnerable to the humans' superior maneuverability. Captain Morrison led a group of 5 destroyers in a flanking attack against a squadron of alien frigates. The human ships moved like a pack of wolves, coordinating their attacks to overwhelm the enemy vessels one by one. "Target their command ship," Morrison ordered. "If we can take out their leader, the rest might lose coordination." The human destroyers opened fire with everything they had. Kinetic rounds and particle beams converged on the alien command frigate, punching through its shields and armor with devastating effect. The enemy ship's bridge exploded in a shower of debris and atmosphere. Vextar felt his ship shudder as human weapons struck his flagship. The quantum shields that were supposed to protect his vessel were failing under the assault of weapons that seemed to ignore conventional defenses. "Damage report," he called out, trying to maintain his composure. "Multiple hull breaches, Commander. The humans are using some kind of weapon that creates localized space-time distortions. Our shields can't stop them." Vextar's confidence finally shattered completely. His grand fleet, which had conquered dozens of worlds, was being systematically destroyed by a handful of primitive human ships. The weapons they were using were beyond anything the hegemony had ever encountered. "Signal the fleet," he ordered reluctantly. "Begin tactical withdrawal. We need to regroup and assess the situation." But the human fleet wasn't about to let them escape easily. Captain Parker led his damaged ship in pursuit of the retreating aliens, continuing to fire his remaining gravity torpedoes at any enemy vessel within range. Dr. Rodriguez monitored her weapon systems as they fired their last gravity torpedo. The weapon struck an alien heavy cruiser amidships, creating a massive distortion that tore the ship in half. The 2 pieces drifted apart, trailing atmosphere and debris. "That's our last torpedo, Captain," she reported. "But the particle beams are still at full power." The human fleet pressed their advantage, pursuing the retreating aliens and continuing to inflict damage on their larger ships. What had started as an impossible battle was turning into a rout. Lieutenant Collins continued to monitor alien communications, translating their increasingly desperate messages. "Captain, they're calling for emergency reinforcements. They're also reporting that human weapons technology is far beyond what they expected. Morrison nodded grimly. Good. Maybe word will spread that humans aren't as easy to conquer as they thought. The battle continued to rage, but the momentum had clearly shifted in favor of the human fleet. The aliens were learning a hard lesson about underestimating their opponents, while the humans were proving that innovation and determination could overcome overwhelming odds. As more alien ships fell to human weapons, Commander Vextar began to realize that this battle would change everything. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity was not just another primitive species to be conquered, but a force to be reckoned with. The battle had been raging for 3 hours, and the space around the two fleets was filled with debris from destroyed ships. Most of it belonged to the Zephyrian hegemony fleet. What had started as a confident assault on a primitive species had turned into a nightmare of destruction and confusion. Captain Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he studied the tactical display aboard the UNS Defiance. His ship had taken multiple hits, but she was still fighting. Around him, his crew worked with grim determination, firing weapon after weapon at the massive alien vessels. "Captain," his weapons officer called out, "we're down to 40% ammunition on the kinetic rounds. Particle beams are still at full power, but the generators are running hot." Morrison nodded. The human fleet had been fighting hard, but they couldn't keep up this pace forever. They needed to end this battle soon, one way or another. "Signal the fleet," Morrison ordered. "Execute attack pattern Omega. We're going straight through their center." The human ships began to move in, a coordinated formation that would take them directly into the heart of the alien fleet. It was a desperate maneuver, but it was also exactly what the aliens wouldn't expect. Commander Vextar watched in horror as the small human fleet charged directly at his massive ships. The tactical computer was showing him numbers that seemed impossible. His fleet had started with 1,200 ships. Now he had fewer than 500 still capable of fighting. "They're insane," his tactical officer whispered. "They're outnumbered 10 to 1 and they're attacking us head-on." Vextar wanted to disagree, but he was beginning to understand that these humans didn't think like any other species he had encountered. They seemed to get more dangerous when the odds were against them, not less. "All ships, focus fire on the approaching human vessels," he ordered. "Destroy them before they reach our formation." Captain Ben Parker led his squadron of destroyers directly toward the largest concentration of alien ships. The UNS Stalwart shook under the impact of multiple plasma beams, but her armor held. Parker could see the alien flagship ahead, larger than any ship he had ever seen. "Dr. Rodriguez," he called over the intercom, "I need everything you've got. We're about to go toe-to-toe with their command ship." "Captain," Rodriguez replied from her engineering station, "I'm reading massive power signatures from that ship. Their weapons could vaporize us with a single hit." "Then we better not let them hit us," Parker said grimly. "Helm, evasive maneuvers. Weapons, target their shield generators." The human ships moved through the alien formation like sharks through a school of fish. They were smaller and faster than the enemy vessels, able to dodge between the massive hulls while striking at vulnerable points. Admiral Carter watched the battle from Earth, coordinating her fleet's movements with the skill of a master tactician. She could see that her ships were taking damage, but they were giving far more than they received. "All ships," she broadcast, "deploy the nanobots. Let's show them what human technology can really do." Dr. Rodriguez activated the final experimental weapon in humanity's arsenal. Millions of microscopic robots launched from the human ships, invisible to alien sensors but programmed with a single purpose: to infiltrate enemy vessels and disable their systems from within. The nanobots spread through space like an invisible cloud, seeking out the nearest alien ships. When they found hull breaches created by human weapons, they swarmed inside and began their deadly work. Aboard the Zephyrian heavy cruiser Thunder of Worlds, the crew noticed the first signs of system failure within minutes. Lights began to flicker, then went out completely. Computer screens went dark one by one as the nanobots systematically destroyed the ship's electronic systems. "Engineering, what's happening down there?" the ship's captain demanded. "Unknown, sir. All our systems are failing simultaneously. We're losing power throughout the ship." Similar reports began flooding in from across the Zephyrian fleet. "Ship, Aftership went dark as the nanobots completed their work. Entire squadrons of alien vessels became floating hulks, their crews trapped inside ships that no longer responded to commands. Vextar watched his tactical display with growing panic as dozens of his ships disappeared from the screen. They weren't being destroyed by weapons he could see. They were simply stopping, going dark, becoming useless. "What's happening to our ships?" he demanded. Kethra worked frantically to analyze the phenomenon. "Commander, I'm detecting microscopic devices throughout our fleet. They appear to be some kind of automated system that's targeting our electronics. How is that possible? How did they get aboard our ships?" "I don't know, sir. They're too small for our sensors to track individually. They must have been launched during the battle." Captain Morrison led his squadron through the heart of the alien formation, targeting the command ships that were still operational. The human vessels moved with deadly precision, their weapons cutting through alien hulls like hot knives through butter. "Focus on that flagship," Morrison ordered. "If we can take out their commander, the rest of the fleet might surrender." The UNS Defiance and her escorts opened fire on Vextar's command ship with everything they had. Kinetic rounds punched through the alien vessel's shields while particle beams carved deep gouges in her armor. Vextar felt his ship shake as human weapons tore into her hull. Emergency alarms wailed throughout the bridge as systems failed one after another. The ship that had been the pride of the hegemony fleet was being systematically destroyed by vessels a fraction of her size. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving reports from across the fleet. Over 60% of our ships are either destroyed or disabled. The humans are requesting our surrender." The word hit Vextar like a physical blow. Surrender. The mighty Zephyrian hegemony, conquerors of 47 worlds, was being asked to surrender by a species they had considered primitive just hours before. Captain Parker maneuvered his ship alongside a disabled alien heavy cruiser, studying the massive vessel through his view screen. The enemy ship was 3 times larger than his own, but it was completely helpless. Whatever Dr. Rodriguez had done to it, the ship was now just a floating piece of metal. "Dr. Rodriguez," he called, "how long will the nanobots keep working?" "They're designed to disable key systems permanently," she replied. "Those ships won't be functional again without major repairs that could take months." Parker smiled grimly. The humans had not only defeated the alien fleet, they had done it with technology the enemy couldn't understand or counter. Lieutenant Amy Collins monitored the alien communications channels, listening to their increasingly desperate messages. What she heard made her both proud and slightly sorry for their enemies. "Captain Morrison," she reported, "the aliens are calling this the worst military disaster in their history. They're describing human weapons as impossible and requesting immediate withdrawal from the system." Morrison considered the alien request. His fleet had fought brilliantly, but they were still outnumbered by the ships that remained functional. However, those ships seemed to have lost their will to fight. "Open a channel to the alien flagship," Morrison ordered. "Let's see if their commander wants to talk now." The main screen flickered to life, showing Commander Vextar on the bridge of his damaged ship. The alien looked beaten and confused, his earlier confidence completely gone. "Human commander," Vextar said through the translation system, "your species fights with weapons we do not understand. We acknowledge our defeat. What are your terms?" Morrison looked around his bridge at his tired but victorious crew. They had done the impossible, defeating an enemy that should have crushed them easily. "Complete withdrawal from human space," Morrison replied. "Take your remaining ships and leave. Spread the word to your government that humanity is not as helpless as you thought." Vextar nodded slowly. "It will be done. But I must warn you, human commander. The galaxy is vast, and there are powers much greater than the hegemony. Today you have won a great victory, but it may also have made you many enemies." The alien fleet began to withdraw, their surviving ships limping away from the Sol system while hundreds of wrecked vessels drifted in space behind them. The battle was over, and against all odds, humanity had won. 3 days after the battle, the remnants of the Zephyrian hegemony fleet limped back to their home territory. Commander Vextar sat in his damaged command chair, staring at reports that told a story he could barely believe. Of the 1,200 ships that had entered the Sol system, only 347 were returning home. The rest were destroyed, disabled, or captured by the humans. His flagship bore the scars of human weapons, with hull plates twisted and burned from particle beam strikes. The ship's quantum shields had been completely useless against human technology, and half of his crew was dead or injured. Vextar himself had a bandage wrapped around his head from when a human kinetic round had torn through the bridge. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving a message from the Hegemony High Command. They want a full report on what happened." Vextar closed his eyes, dreading the conversation he was about to have. How could he explain that a primitive species with fewer than 50 ships had destroyed the most powerful fleet in hegemony history? How could he make them understand that everything they thought they knew about humans was wrong? In the Sol system, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of his ship, looking out at the battlefield that surrounded Earth. Hundreds of alien ships drifted in space, some destroyed completely, others disabled by the nanobots that continued to eat away at their systems. The human fleet had lost only 5 ships in the entire battle, with 12 more requiring major repairs. It was the most one-sided victory in the history of space warfare, and Morrison still couldn't quite believe they had won. "Captain?" Lieutenant Collins approached him with a datapad. "Admiral Carter wants to see the final casualty reports." Morrison took the pad and reviewed the numbers. Human casualties were remarkably light considering what they had faced. The aliens had lost over 40,000 crew members, while humans had lost fewer than 200. The difference was staggering. Admiral Lisa Carter sat in her office on Earth, reviewing intelligence reports that were flooding in from across the galaxy. News of the Battle of Sol was spreading faster than light through the interstellar communication networks, and the reactions were exactly what she had expected. Some alien species were expressing shock and disbelief that the mighty hegemony fleet had been defeated. Others were sending congratulations to humanity for their victory. A few were making diplomatic overtures, suddenly interested in establishing trade relationships with the species that had just proven itself capable of destroying any fleet that threatened them. But Carter was most interested in the reports from the darker corners of the galaxy. Several hostile species that had been considering attacks on human colonies were suddenly reconsidering their plans. The reputation that humanity was building might be more valuable than any weapon. Dr. Elena Rodriguez worked in her laboratory, aboard the UNS Stalwart, examining pieces of alien technology that had been recovered from the battlefield. The Zephyrian ships used advanced materials and energy systems that could improve human technology significantly. "Fascinating," she muttered as she studied a fragment of alien armor plating. "Their quantum shields are actually more sophisticated than I thought. We just happened to develop weapons that could bypass them completely." Her assistant looked up from another workstation. "Dr. Rodriguez, what do you think would have happened if they had known about our weapons in advance?" Rodriguez considered the question carefully. "They might have adapted their defenses, but I don't think it would have mattered. Their entire military philosophy is based on overwhelming force. They're not prepared to fight an enemy that thinks differently than they do." Captain Ben Parker toured the damage to his ship, the UNS Stalwart. Despite taking multiple direct hits from alien plasma weapons, the vessel was still operational. The experimental armor had performed beyond all expectations, and Parker was already thinking about improvements for the next generation of human warships. "Sir," his damage control officer reported, "we'll need 2 weeks in dry dock to repair all the damage, but the ship is spaceworthy. The new armor saved our lives." Parker nodded, looking at the twisted metal where alien weapons had struck his ship. "Make sure Dr. Rodriguez gets detailed reports on how the armor performed. We're going to need more ships like this one." On the Zephyrian homeworld, Vextar stood before the Hegemony Council, trying to explain the impossible defeat his fleet had suffered. The assembled leaders listened in stunned silence as he described human weapons that ignored quantum shields and tiny robots that could disable entire starships. "Commander," the High Chancellor interrupted, "are you saying that this species has military technology superior to our own?" Vextar hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Not just superior, Chancellor. Different. They approach warfare in ways we never considered. Their weapons use principles our scientists said were impossible. The council chamber erupted in angry voices as the political implications became clear. The hegemony's reputation for invincibility was shattered. Word of their defeat would spread throughout the galaxy, encouraging other species to resist hegemony expansion. "What do you recommend, Commander?" the Chancellor asked when order was restored. "We avoid human space completely," Vextar replied without hesitation. "They are more dangerous than anything we have ever encountered. We should focus our attention on easier targets." Back on Earth, Admiral Carter received a priority message from the outer colonies. Human settlements throughout known space were reporting that alien raiders and pirates were suddenly avoiding human ships and territories. The reputation from the Battle of Sol was already having effects far beyond the solar system. "Admiral," her aide reported, "we're also receiving requests from 3 different alien governments asking about defensive alliances. They want human protection against the hegemony and other aggressive species." Carter smiled. Humanity had entered galactic politics in the most dramatic way possible. They were no longer seen as a minor species to be ignored or conquered, but as a major power to be respected and feared. Captain Morrison received new orders while his ship underwent repairs. The UNS Defiance was being assigned to lead humanity's first deep space exploration fleet. Their mission was to venture beyond the known sectors of space and establish a human presence throughout the galaxy. "Sir," Collins said as she handed him the official orders, "it looks like we're not going to be defending Earth anymore. We're going to be expanding human territory." Morrison read through the orders with growing excitement. Humanity was no longer content to hide in their home system. They were ready to claim their place among the stars, and everyone in the galaxy would know they had the strength to back up their claims. Dr. Rodriguez worked late into the night, designing new weapons and defenses based on what they had learned from the battle. Human technology was advancing rapidly, driven by the knowledge that there were other hostile species out there who might not be as easy to defeat as the hegemony. "The next time aliens come looking for a fight," she told her assistant, "we'll be even more ready for them." Throughout the galaxy, the story of the Battle of Sol spread from world to world. The details grew more dramatic with each telling, but the core message remained the same. Humanity was not a species to be underestimated. On worlds throughout known space, alien military commanders studied reports of human weapons and tactics, trying to understand how such a small fleet had defeated such a large one. Most came to the same conclusion that Vextar had reached. Humans were uniquely dangerous. Captain Parker received word that his ship was being assigned to the new exploration fleet. The UNS Stalwart would be one of the first human vessels to venture into unexplored regions of space, carrying the flag of Earth to distant stars. As he prepared for the mission, Parker reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. Humanity had gone from being a small, insignificant species hiding in one star system to being a major galactic power with a reputation that preceded them throughout the galaxy. The age of human expansion was beginning, and the universe would never be the same. Wherever human ships traveled, they would carry with them the memory of the day when 47 small vessels defeated the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. The Battle of Sol had done more than save Earth. It had announced to every species in the galaxy that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and that underestimating them could be a fatal mistake.